Welcome into the Solo Shot Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Dom Manna. Happy Solo Shot Saturday, everyone. And I told you changes were coming. Hope you guys enjoy the new look, the new intro, and many things that are still to come. I know a lot of you are saying, Dom, it's December. The new year hasn't happened yet. Why are you switching things over? To me, this is the time of year when everything is officially 2024. Once free agency opens, once the winter meetings happen, you are in the 2024 baseball season, even though the calendar year hasn't changed. And a team that's been getting busy before the winter meetings that start in Nashville on December 3rd, the St. Louis Cardinals have already gone out and done what they said they were going to do and bolster that rotation. I talked about it a little bit last week with them getting Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, two guys that are inning eaters, one that has experience in St. Louis. And now they went out there and got a bigger fish in Sonny Gray. Sonny Gray, 3 years, $75 million, a guy who was just second in the AL Cy Young race behind Garrett Cole, and a guy who, outside of his tenure with the Yankees, when he's in these smaller markets that aren't as big of a pressure situation, he's been a very good starting pitcher. So the Cardinals went out there and they got 3 starters. However, it's going to be interesting to see what they do the rest of the offseason because it almost feels like the Cardinals are settling. Like Sonny Gray was their white whale and the best that they can do all offseason when they have a surplus of infielders and outfielders right now. Katie Wu, who covers the Cardinals, said that the Cardinals don't rebuild. And this is part of the way that they're trying to get back. It's hard for them to recruit free agents after having their worst season in decades. I understand that. But when you have Nolan Arenado and you have Paul Goldschmidt, you can build a contender. Sonny Gray helps that rotation a ton. He does. He really does. He's going to bolster it. He's going to be consistent. He's going to give them quality starts. But that bullpen past Gallegos and Helsley needs work. Their catching situation with Wilson Contreras and young prospect Ivan Herrera is going to be fun to watch. And I think that we're going to go forward seeing what the Cardinals can really do in the trade market because you have an infield surplus. Mason Wynn came up at the end of last year. He's going to be your opening day shortstop. Nolan Gorman, Brendan Donovan, Tommy Edman, other guys in the middle infield. And then in the outfield, you have Jordan Walker, fan favorite Lars Nootbaar, guys like Dylan Carlson and Tyler O'Neill, who used to be untouchable. Not to mention Alec Burleson and the other guys that they have in the minor leagues that might be major league ready. They have guys to move, whether it's for bullpen help, whether it's for another starter. I think that they would make a lot of sense, especially in a very weak hitters market. Outside of Shohei Ohtani and Cody Bellinger, the market really falls off. So I'm just worried as a Cardinals supporter. They're a National League team because of Albert Pujols. I've watched a lot of games. I've listened to a lot of their radio broadcasts. I'm worried that the Cardinals are settling. They got their 3 starters early in the offseason, and it's going to be interesting. Will, I mentioned Kyle Gibson at the very beginning. I talked about him and Lance Lynn last week. They're innings eaters, but they're guys that you want as your 4 or 5 in your rotation. And the fact that they're going to be counted on as the 3-4, I hope that they stay healthy and give the innings that they want. But that bullpen needs to be better to offset the days where Kyle Gibson or Lance Lynn, they give you 4 or 5 innings, but they give up 4 or 5 runs. So it's going to be interesting to watch how the Cardinals progress this offseason. I'm excited for them to kind of build this team up back into a contender. You have 2 legit Hall of Famers at the corners, and you have to build up this pitching staff. Sonny Gray is a great step in that direction, but if Sonny Gray goes down, you're back in a very similar place to where you were before. Steven Matz right now is the young man in this rotation. He's 33 years old, a guy that was switching between the bullpen and the starting rotation last year, had some stretches of excellence. Miles Nicholas, they're hoping at 36 years old, can come back and put up borderline all-star numbers like he did in 2022. And then you have the young guys, Matthew Liberatore, Kyle Thompson. What are they going to be? They didn't show you too much in a very struggling second half for the Cardinals last year, but it's going to be really fun to see what this team is able to do. I think having 3 guys that can give you innings is a good start, but they need to trade one of these infielders and one of these outfielders, and they need to go and get more pitching if they really want to go back to October. Now, the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes had a pretty big revelation dropped recently, which broke my heart a little bit as a fan, but reportedly the Rangers, Mets, and Red Sox are all out of the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes and are moving on to other players. The Mets does not surprise me at all. When you're retooling the way that you are, signing Shohei Ohtani and doubling down with that big of a contract wasn't really the smartest idea for them. But the Red Sox and the Rangers were both teams that I thought would be sneaky fun for him to go to, not just because I'm a Red Sox fan, but because those two teams could use that kind of box office leverage right now. Both teams, the Rangers coming off a World Series, the Red Sox coming off a last place finish, they both could have used that extra publicity that comes with Shohei Ohtani, the extra funds that come into your organization. But they're out. That means that the Red Sox can focus on going after guys like Jordan Montgomery and Yamamoto for the rotation. That means that the Rangers can try to keep Montgomery or go after another bullpen arm this offseason. And both of those teams don't have to worry about what happens when Shohei Ohtani eventually breaks down. Because as good of a player as he is, he's going under the knife for the second time with his elbow. He might not be the same pitcher ever again. And if he continues to have these surgeries and get hurt, this contract could end up being a lot of missed games, whether he signs for 6, 8, 10 years. There's a lot of risk involved in the Shohei Ohtani contract, but a lot of reward, both financially and for getting one of the best power hitters in baseball on your team. So the sweepstakes is starting to move forward. The Dodgers are still the favorite, in my opinion, but Seattle's still involved. The Cubs are still involved, who were pinned as the dark horse team. The Giants are still involved, and Seattle has not been ruled out yet, which I think would be a really fun fit for him to go up to Seattle. But we'll see if they have the money and the wherewithal to make him sign. It's going to be very fun to see where he goes. And I told you it's going to continue being a topic every single week till he signs. A lot of people are saying that he might sign before the winter meetings are over, that he's already came to a decision. I have no reason to believe that. I think there's a lot of smoke screens with Shohei Ohtani, but I also know that Shohei Ohtani is holding up some of these other free agents, especially the hitters, from finding homes. And Shohei Ohtani being there, it would be very, very fun. But I don't think that the winter meeting is going to have that big of a splash. What is a big splash and huge for me is the Hall of Fame. Now, I know that some people aren't as into the Hall of Fame for various reasons, whether it's someone that is outside the Hall of Fame that you thought should be elected, or someone that gets support for the Hall of Fame or is in the Hall of Fame that probably shouldn't be. But the Hall of Fame is still the purest of all sports. Only 1% of Major League Baseball players who have ever played are in the Hall of Fame. And the Baseball Writers Association of America has sent out their 2024 ballots for all the voters. You have to have 10 years of writing for an established sports column, virtually or print, to be eligible to vote. And baseball players that are on the ballot had to have played at least 10 seasons in the major leagues and had to wait 5 years after retirement to become eligible. There are a ton of first-year candidates of note. Chase Utley has been getting a lot of steam early, a sabermetric darling at second base. But he is not one of the guys that gets my vote. The 3 first-year players that I want to talk about, first off, is Adrian Beltre. he is a lock of locks. I put him in the thumbnail of this video. 3,000 hits, a Gold Glove third baseman, a consummate professional, 477 career home runs at the hot corner, the most hits by a Dominican player. He just has so many things going for him, and it's going to be a shock to me if he's not in the 90s percentage-wise. He already has 100% of the vote through the first 8 ballots that have came in, but he's someone that probably won't be unanimous, but sneaky could be because he is a slam dunk, a lock Hall of Famer. Outside of Adrian Beltre, the next closest Hall of Famer to be clearly is Joe Mauer. Now, Joe Mauer is an interesting case because he caught less than 1,000 games in his major league career. But during his time as a catcher, he won 3 batting titles. And if that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. Only 7 times in Major League history has a catcher won the batting title. The only player other than Joe Mauer to have more than one is Ernie Lombardi, who is also in the Hall of Fame. Joe Mauer has the most with 3. He has nearly half the catching batting titles in the history of the sport. He was an amazing contact hitter, going the other way, hitting in the Twins Rod Carew type way, and had an amazing career, over 2,000 hits. The rule of 2,000 is a big thing with Hall of Fame voters. He got there. A guy that didn't have a lot of power, but did win an MVP for the most home runs in his career with 28 that season. This is a guy who, to me, should be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but because he didn't finish his career at the catching position, because he doesn't have the gaudiest power and RBI stats, it's going to take him a couple of years to get in. But when you look at catchers, which is one of the least represented positions in the Hall of Fame, Joe Mauer clears. And if Joe Mauer can't get into the Hall of Fame, all the people that are saying Buster Posey should be in, he has no prayer if Joe Mauer can't get in the Hall of Fame. Buster Posey has significantly less counting stats, and a guy who played significantly less games also had the problem of having an injury that caused him to not catch anymore regularly. So Joe Mauer should be in the Hall of Fame. I'd put him in first ballot, and he gets my second vote. And the final first-year candidate that I'm checking the box off on is Matt Holliday. And the reason that I'm voting for Matt Holliday isn't because I think he should be a first ballot Hall of Famer. To me, if I had a ballot, I would be using my 10 votes because that's the most that you can use. And Matt Holliday is a name that doesn't deserve to be one and done on the Baseball Hall of Fame ballot. This is a guy who, Coors effect or not, put together an amazing season in 2007 that should have won him the National League MVP. It was stolen from him by Jimmy Rollins of the Phillies when that team went on a crazy run in the second half to make the postseason. But the Colorado Rockies would not have been in the World Series in 2007 if it was not for Matt Holliday's hitting. He was a tremendous hitter, 299 career lifetime hitter, basically a 300 career hitter, over 15 seasons, a guy with over 300 home runs, over 1,000 runs scored, over 1,200 RBIs. He was a dang good player for a long time. And this is the kind of guy who I believe deserves to have consideration and has the chance, I think, if he sticks around, to build himself, maybe not into a Larry Walker type case, but a guy who can get over that 50% marker, which every player that wasn't suspicious of steroids, who has gotten at least 50% of the vote throughout their time on the ballot, you need to get 5% to stay on and 75% for election. Everyone that's gotten over 50% that wasn't a steroid guy has gotten elected eventually. Gil Hodges had the longest wait back in 2022. But Matt Holliday, he's a sneaky guy who I think he's not a first ballot guy, but a guy who I would have no problem with him being in the Hall of Fame, so I'm checking that box. And then we get to the list of guys who have been here for a while. The number one favorite to get into the Hall of Fame is Todd Helton. And I would vote for Todd Helton. I know a lot of people, the Coors effect affects them with how they view the Hall of Fame. But Todd Helton was a tremendous hitter, and I'm not going to fault him for the ballpark he played in. He was drafted by the Rockies. He stayed loyal to that organization. And as great as Todd Helton's numbers are at Coors Field, if you look at his OPS away from Coors Field, his away OPS for his career is higher than multiple Hall of Famers' career OPS for all their games. And that's just a tremendous thing. An 855 road OPS, a guy who hit 285 on the road, a guy who has over 300 home runs, an absolute run producer, a guy who walked, a guy who played pretty good defense, got a couple gold gloves. And when you make the Rockies Mount Rushmore, you can't put someone over Todd Helton. He's like the number one name when you make a Rockies Mount Rushmore. That's a Hall of Famer in all sense of the word. Look at his baseball reference page, and you will be really shocked with how great of a hitter he was throughout his career. 316 career average. That is amazing. The other guy who is getting a lot of steam is Billy Wagner. Helton had 72% of the vote last year, so he's pretty much a lock to get in with Beltre this year. Wagner was in the 60s. And to me, Billy Wagner would not get my vote. I'm very strict when it comes to relievers in the Hall of Fame. And while he was an elite strikeout reliever, one of only 13 relievers with over 1,000 career strikeouts, his postseason to me matters a lot more because when you're a closer in the postseason, you are having the game in your hands. And his postseason stats just are a big step down from what we saw in the regular season for Billy Wagner. I understand it's not the biggest sample size, but it's a guy where when you have 422 career saves, I wouldn't have a problem with him getting in the Hall of Fame, but I'm not going to vote for a reliever that doesn't have 500 plus saves or doesn't have postseason dominance to go along with 350, 400 something saves. And Billy Wagner is just a guy that analytically, he's a solid candidate, but to me, just doesn't have enough. But the other guys who will get my vote now that we've gotten past the first year guys that I'm in on and the top two guys who are both projected to get into the Hall of Fame this year from building up their cases, we get into the fun guys. And the first one to me is Carlos Beltran. I don't know why Carlos Beltran is getting some slack early in the Hall of Fame voting process so far. I've seen a couple people that voted for him last year as a first-year candidate take him off their ballot in year two. Carlos Beltran is arguably a top 10 center fielder in the history of baseball. There are only 4 switch hitters in the history of the major leagues with over 400 career home runs: Mickey Mantle, Eddie Murray, Chipper Jones, and Carlos Beltran. This is a guy that stole almost 300 career bases. This is a guy who was a Gold Glove caliber defender. And talk about postseason. Carlos Beltran is a postseason legend. And I know he was the scapegoat for the 2017 Astros. He lost his managerial job with the Mets for it. I knew he wasn't going to be a first ballot guy. But the fact that he's already losing traction in year two, when this is a guy who 2,700 hits is a slam dunk all around. This is a guy who I would vote in first ballot, and he's starting to lose some credit. I think that Carlos Beltran is severely misunderstood. And even if you look past his Royals days and Mets days, this is a guy who was productive late in his career too, in his stops in San Francisco, in St. Louis, in New York with the Yankees. Just a really good player that compiled an amazing career, doesn't have the hardware of MVPs, but a guy who was a super valuable player at one of the most valuable positions in center field. I think he is a obvious guy. And the fact that people are already starting to second guess him in year two, it's not a good sign. I know it's super early, but I haven't heard a ton of okay, now we need to get Carlos Beltran in. There was a little bit of that with Vladimir Guerrero Sr., where he didn't get in first ballot because of a few things, but then all the writers were like, okay, now we can put him in. And I'm not seeing the same kind of steam so far for Carlos Beltran. He wasn't obviously as close as Vladdy was in year one, but I was expecting him to make a big stride, and it's not looking like he's going to move up a ton right now. The next guy is Andrew Jones. Again, a 400 home run club member, and is one of 4 players in Major League history with 400 home runs and 10 gold gloves. Ken Griffey Jr., Willie Mays, Mike Schmidt. Now, Andrew Jones, unlike Beltran, did not age well. He did not be productive in his 30s, and that hurt him in the eyes of a lot of people. If he was a peak guy that retired early because of an accident like Roy Campanella, or because of an illness like Kirby Puckett, or because of a degenerative arm like Sandy Koufax, Andrew Jones probably would already be in the Hall of Fame. This is a guy who didn't even break the rule of 2,000. He has over 1,900 hits. If he gets elected by the writers, which he's trending in that direction, he will be the first modern candidate to get elected to the Hall of Fame with less than 2,000 hits through the Baseball Writers Association of America. And I would put him in. The rule of 2,000 is a pretty big deal, but if you're going to break it, one of the best defensive center fielders of all time, I'm telling you that he has over 1,200 RBIs and 400 plus home runs. You're putting him in. The batting average plummeted in his 30s. He was a 264 career hitter. Nothing about him screams amazing, but he did more than enough to be in the Hall of Fame. There are plenty of people that did less in more time that are enshrined in Cooperstown to this day. So I'm a yes on Andrew Jones. The next 2 guys that I would check yeses on are very similar to Matt Holliday, where these guys are not first ballot guys, and they're guys that might not even get in through the BBWAA, but I want them to stick around on the ballot. And that's Bobby Abreu and Torrey Hunter. I know these guys played in these outfield positions. The outfield in the Hall of Fame is stacked. But when you look at Bobby Abreu as a complete package, walks, stolen bases, doubles, batting average, home runs, he did everything very well. Master of everything, but not an elite player in any specific category. And Torrey Hunter has home runs and the defensive prowess where I would not be shocked if down the road a Veterans Committee calls his name. And that's why I'm checking the box on them. Everybody that I vote for isn't necessarily a guy that I think needs to get into Cooperstown tomorrow. But if they put together a good enough career where I wouldn't have a problem with them getting elected, I'm going to check that box and support them. And the final player that I want to talk about is a player that just baffles my mind, and that is Gary Sheffield. Gary Sheffield is one of the best right-handed hitters I've ever seen. And I saw the very back end of Gary Sheffield. This is a man who has the same steroid allegations as David Ortiz. And I know many of you will say David Ortiz tested positive. He was on a list, but Gary Sheffield and David Ortiz both played in that era past 2005, where they were testing regularly and suspending players for steroids after both of their names were listed on that same report, and neither of them served suspensions for steroids. To me, maybe they were doing it before. We don't know what they tested positive for on that report. There was a big list of things they tested for. They just wanted to get as many names as possible so that they could move forward with suspending from the public pressure. But Gary Sheffield, over 60 career WAR, 2,689 hits, 509 home runs, a 292 career batting average, just under 300. And this is a guy, when I say 1,200 is a lot of RBIs, 1,676 RBIs for Gary Sheffield. Statistically, he's a slam dunk. And unlike guys like Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez who were on the ballot, who were dumb enough after 2005, when baseball started testing regularly and suspending players, both got caught multiple times and served multiple suspensions for performance-enhancing drugs. Gary Sheffield was clean. And is it possible he used steroids in his career? Absolutely. Is it possible that there's players in the Hall of Fame that use steroids? Absolutely. But Gary Sheffield did not get disciplined by the league for it. And the fact that he's being disciplined so hard by the baseball writers baffles me. This is a guy that's barely been able to get 30% of the vote. And he's in his final year, and he's not going to get elected. But I hope down the road, one of these era committees sees the hypocrisy that has happened with Gary Sheffield's case, getting lumped in with Bonds and all these other players, some that never got suspended, like Bonds and Clemens, that I would vote for, and he's getting lumped in with Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez, who got tested positive and got suspended. So my ballot, pretty simple, all things considering. Adrian Beltre, Carlos Beltran, Gary Sheffield, Joe Mauer, Todd Helton, Andrew Jones, Torrey Hunter, Matt Holliday, Bobby Abreu. Beltre and Helton are locks for this year. Billy Wagner, who I did not vote for, has a good chance to be in this year as well. I'm hoping to see positive strides towards election for Andrew Jones, Carlos Beltran, and I'm hoping to see a great first-year finish out of Joe Mauer. That's the number one thing. Outside of them, I hope that Bobby Abreu, Torrey Hunter continue to stay around, and I hope Matt Holliday joins them in the 5% and up club, where he can just keep getting looked at, because Matt Holliday was a lot better than you remember. Check out his baseball reference page if you don't believe me. I hope you guys enjoyed my Hall of Fame rant and balloting. I think it's the most wonderful time of the year. You can follow Ryan Thibodeau at Not Mr. Tibbs on X and get all the updates of all the ballots. He will show you who submitted to him, who they voted for, and if they didn't submit anonymously, you will get to see if a player gained or lost a vote from the previous year, so they can tally up how these players are trending. There's only about 8 ballots in so far, but expect as the month of December goes by for a lot more ballots to come in up until the announcement in January. Here at the Solo Shot Sports Podcast, we like to throw it back down the third base line to this day in sports history and just highlight an event, a player, a moment that is historically significant to keep the great history of this sport alive. And December 2nd sneakily had a lot of interesting kind of awards and signings and trades, births, deaths as well. But to me, it was pretty easy to decide, because we're still talking about this one to this day. And that is Bobby Bonilla Day, which was retroactively started on this date because Bobby Bonilla signed with the Mets. And when Bobby Bonilla signed his contract with the Mets for 5 years, $29 million, which at the time was a very rich contract, they decided, hey, we're going to defer the final year and give Bonilla an 8% interest rate beginning in 2011. So from 2011 through 2035, he will be getting paid $1.19 million every Bobby Bonilla day until he's 72 years old. So this is a guy who got out of the last year of his contract, which is about $6 million, and he got like an extra $40 million from the Mets over the rest of this contract. Absolutely genius by his agent, Dennis Gilbert, getting him that kind of interest. The Mets just wanted the contract off the books for the final year. And today we still talk about Bobby Bonilla Day every summer when he gets his check. So Bobby Bonilla signing with the Mets on this date in 1991 started one of the casual baseball fans' favorite unofficial holidays in the sport. And it's just super fun every time Bobby Bonilla passes to just laugh at the Mets a little bit, because there's been so many mistakes in that franchise, but this one is just the gift that keeps on giving. Bobby Bonilla, keep making your money, live a long, happy life till you're 72, get every single year to enjoy it. And speaking of every single year to enjoy a contract, the Brewers announced that 19-year-old Jackson Choiurio is being signed to an 8-year, $80 million deal. And if you're wondering who Jackson Choiurio is, you'd think assuredly like the Braves. Oh, he's a young player that just came up for them. They're going to sign him to a longer team-friendly extension now and avoid arbitration and get a great deal. No, Jackson Choiurio, who is baseball's number 2 pipeline prospect at the moment. He's 19 years old and has only played 6 games over the AA level. This is a record contract for any player to never play in a major league game. And you have to be thinking, well, has the Braves method with Alex Anthopoulos signing all these young players early, has it ruined the rest of the league trying to follow suit? Have they gotten so many deals where teams look around the league and they see Ronald Acuna Jr., the National League MVP, on a ridiculously discounted deal? They see Ozzy Albies, who I added to my countdown, making absolute penny change with team options to boot at the end of that contract. And they say, oh, this young player that's shown something in the major leagues, we want to sign him to that kind of deal. And they can't get it anymore. So you're seeing these crazy contracts like the Julio Rodriguez one after year 1 in Seattle that he signed. Or now the Brewers are taking a risk and signing a guy who's never even played in the major leagues. Jackson Choiurio could end up being a Ronald Acuna type perennial all-star that is severely underpaid. But if Jackson Choiurio ends up being a flameout, like we've seen a lot of these top prospects over the years not work out for various reasons. Sometimes it's health, sometimes it's mental, sometimes it's their situation, and we see them prosper somewhere else. But if Jackson Choiurio in the Brewers can't have a successful future, $80 million isn't going to bankrupt a franchise, but it's going to set a precedent. And if Choiurio ends up being a steal, you're going to see a ton of top prospects in double and triple A signing big contracts before they hit the majors. And that just opens up a whole new can of worms for baseball's budgeting problem. And I'm excited to see what this kid can do. He's obviously extremely talented, a guy who has all the tools, and the Brewers believe he is the future. But if he ends up not being the future, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds for all other top prospects going forward. Congrats to Choiurio, 19 years old, getting that kind of money secured before you go to the major leagues. I understand wanting to bet on yourself and get more money by producing at the major league level, but not everybody does. So you cannot blame this young man for taking that money, but you can watch with intrigue going forward to see if the Brewers just started a new trend following the Braves extending all their young players, making it impossible for these young players that have had success at the major league level to get goaded into these cheap team-friendly contracts. But it'll be interesting to watch. I think the Brewers are bold for doing this. I think they're on the verge of a rebuild. So signing your top prospect to this kind of money and saying we're going to build around you, it's definitely a strategy. And I'll leave it at that. I appreciate each and every one of you for spending part of your Saturday or week with me. Let me know in the comments below who you would vote for on this year's 2024 BBWA Hall of Fame ballot. You can vote up to 10 names. I will leave a link to the ballot in the description below. And let me know what you think of the new setup. I'd love feedback on it. There's still things that are going to be tweaked and things that are going to be improved on and other ideas that still will come to fruition as the offseason goes on. But I'm excited to take this next step with the podcast, and happy to have all of you along for the ride. Have a great Saturday and rest of your week.